My mother grabbed me by the wrist in front of my entire family and said, "Get on your knees right now and beg your husband to stay." The man she wanted me to beg had been sleeping with a woman from his gym for 11 months. I found out because the woman's husband, Pablito, knocked on my front door on a Saturday afternoon and handed me a credit card statement. His wife's name was on their joint account. 2 charges a week, every Tuesday and Thursday, at a motel on Route 4, for nearly a year. He was calm and polite. He said he thought I deserved to know, shook my hand, and left. When my husband Osvaldo came home from the gym that evening, I told him I knew everything. He denied it for about 4 minutes and then stopped because he could see I had details he couldn't explain away. He said it started as a friendship and became something more. He said he was sorry and wanted to work on our marriage. I told him I didn't. I told him I wanted a divorce. He asked me to think about it. I told him the answer was the same every time I thought about it. He packed a bag and went to his brother's house that night. The next morning, my mother Remedios called. Osvaldo had called her before he called anyone else. He told her I was asking for a divorce and could she please talk to me. She didn't call to ask what happened. She called to tell me what to do. She said marriages survive worse things and every man makes mistakes, and throwing away 8 years over one slip was short-sighted. I told her it wasn't one slip. It was 11 months of slips every Tuesday and Thursday at a motel on Route 4. She said it didn't matter how long it lasted because what mattered was he was willing to come back, and not every man who strays is willing to return, and I should consider myself lucky. I told her no. She said pride was the reason women ended up alone. 3 days later, she organized a family gathering at her house. She told me it was dinner for my Aunt Fermina's birthday. When I arrived, Fermina was there, and so was my uncle Tadeo and my cousin Lisbeth and my grandmother Amparo, and so was Osvaldo. He was sitting at the table with a glass of water. My mother had invited him without telling me. She used my aunt's birthday as cover to ambush me with my own husband in front of the entire family. Osvaldo stood when I walked in. He said he was wrong and had ended things with the other woman and wanted to rebuild what we had. My mother stood next to him nodding through every word. Then she turned to me and said it was time to stop being stubborn. She said Osvaldo had apologized and a good wife moves forward. She told me to get on my knees and ask him to stay. She said it in front of Fermina and Tadeo and Lisbeth and my grandmother Amparo. She told me to kneel in her kitchen and beg the man who cheated on me for 11 months not to leave me. She grabbed my wrist and pulled it downward toward the floor. I pulled my arm back. I told her I wasn't getting on my knees for anyone in this room or any other room. She told me I would die alone. She said Osvaldo was a good provider and men had needs, and sometimes those needs got met elsewhere. And that was the reality of marriage, and I needed to accept it. My grandmother Amparo had been sitting at the end of the table without saying a word. She was 83 years old and had been married to my grandfather for 51 years before he passed, and she had never spoken against anyone in the family for as long as I had been alive. She put her glass down and looked at Remedios and asked her what she just said to me. My mother repeated it. Amparo asked why the woman who was cheated on should be the one on her knees. My mother said because Osvaldo was willing to come back and that was a gift. Amparo asked what kind of gift requires the person receiving it to beg on the floor. She told my mother she raised her better than this. She said a woman who tells her daughter to kneel before the man who betrayed her is not protecting a marriage. She is teaching her daughter that her dignity is negotiable, and a man's presence is worth more than her standing. She told Osvaldo to leave. She said he made a choice every Tuesday and Thursday for 11 months, and no apology entitled him to watch his wife on her knees. Osvaldo left within 5 minutes. My mother tried to follow him and Amparo told her to sit down. After he left, nobody spoke for a long time. My grandmother kept her hand flat on the table like she was holding the whole room in place. I sat back down because my legs were shaking. I looked at my mother and waited. She didn't look at me. She looked at the door Osvaldo walked out of like she lost something that belonged to her. That silence told me everything. This wasn't over. Remedios doesn't lose arguments. She reloads. Fermina was the first one to move. She stood up and came back with the birthday cake and started cutting slices like nothing happened. She poured coffee and set cups around the table and said, "Well, it's still my birthday, so we might as well have cake." Tadeo took a slice. Lisbeth took one too. I picked up a fork just to have something to do with my hands. Then I felt Lisbeth's hand slide under the table and squeeze mine. She leaned close to my ear and whispered, "You did the right thing." Something in my chest loosened for the first time all night. I thought maybe the worst part was over. Then Remedios spoke. She looked straight at Amparo and said, "You had no right to send him away. That was my house and my daughter's marriage, and you overstepped." Amparo didn't blink. She looked at Remedios the way you look at someone who just said something so wrong you need a second to decide how to respond. Then she said, "I overstepped?" You grabbed her arm and told her to kneel. Remedios leaned forward. "Because someone in this family has to fight for her future since she won't fight for it herself." I said the conversation was over. I wasn't doing this in front of everyone again. Remedios turned to me and her voice got harder and more personal. She said, "You think walking away makes you strong? Your father walked away from hard things too. Look where that got him." I stopped moving. My father left when I was young, and it was the one thing she never brought into arguments. It was the line she never crossed because she knew how deep it would cut, and she just crossed it in front of everyone. Then Tadeo stood up. He pushed his chair back and looked at Remedios and said, "That's enough." Not loud, firm, like a man who had watched enough for one night. Remedios closed her mouth. I grabbed my bag and walked out. I squeezed Amparo's shoulder on the way past, and she patted my hand twice without looking up. I got in my car and sat in the driveway with the engine off. My hands were shaking. Then I turned the key. The further I drove from that house, the lighter I felt. Amparo defended me. Lisbeth squeezed my hand. Tadeo shut my mother down when she went too far. I drove with the windows cracked, and for the first time in weeks, felt like the people who mattered had seen what happened. I thought maybe Remedios would back down now that she saw she was alone. I was wrong. When I pulled into my driveway, I checked my phone and saw 4 missed calls from Osvaldo. Then I saw the text. It said, "Your mom gave me the spare key. I'm inside. We need to talk. Please don't be angry." I looked up at my house. The light in the kitchen was on. I always turn it off when I leave. Always. I sat in my car staring at that light and felt every bit of relief drain out of me. Remedios gave him the spare key to my house, the one I kept in my kitchen drawer for emergencies. She must have taken it when she was over, maybe weeks ago. She planned this. If the dinner didn't work, Osvaldo would be waiting at my place. A backup. I walked inside. He was sitting at my table with his hands folded like he belonged there. Like 11 months of motel rooms on Tuesdays and Thursdays didn't happen. He stood fast when I walked in. He said he ended things completely. immediately. He blocked her number and deleted every message and canceled his gym membership. His voice cracked a little when he said, "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway." I let the words sit. Then I asked the only question that mattered. I said, "How did you get in?" He blinked like he wasn't expecting that. He said Remedios brought the key to his brother's house before the dinner. She told him I would be at the gathering until at least 9. She told him to let himself in and be waiting when I got home. She said seeing him sitting at our table in the space we built together would remind me of what I was giving up. She said the house would do the work for her. I said, "So my mother planned this?" He shifted his weight and said, "She's trying to help." I almost laughed. I said, "She's trying to control me. There's a difference." He looked at me with his mouth half open like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. I pointed at the counter and said, "Put the key down and go." He set it on the counter but didn't move toward the door. He said, "I love you. I've loved you since before we got married and I don't know how to stop." His voice was quiet and serious and part of me believed him. I think he did love me in whatever way he was able, but that wasn't enough. Not anymore. I looked at him and said, "You loved me on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays. Tuesdays and Thursdays you loved someone else. That's not love. That's a schedule." Something changed in his face. The softness went away. His jaw tightened and when he spoke again his voice was flat, almost rehearsed. He said, "Your mother said you'd say something like that. She told me to be patient." And that was the moment everything clicked into place. He didn't come up with that on his own. Remedios told him I would say something sharp and he should take it and stay calm. She prepped him. She gave him the key, the timing, the instructions, and the script. This wasn't a husband fighting for his marriage. This was a coordinated campaign, and Remedios was running it from behind the scenes. I looked at him and said, "You need to leave, right now. And the locks will be changed by morning, so don't come back with another key because there won't be one that works." He looked at the key on the counter. He looked at me. Then he walked out, quietly, like a man who knew he lost but didn't fully understand why. I called a locksmith. The woman who answered said someone could be there within the hour. While I waited, I called Lisbeth. She picked up on the second ring, and before I could say anything, she said, "I already know about the key." She said Fermina told her. Remedios had been bragging about the plan earlier that day before the dinner even started. She told Fermina it was romantic. She said when I walked in and saw Osvaldo sitting at my table, I would remember what it felt like to come home to someone, and I would change my mind. Then Lisbeth's voice dropped, and she said something that made my hands go cold. She said, "She told my mom that Amparo is getting confused in her old age and didn't understand what was happening at dinner. She's trying to discredit her too." I sat at my table holding the phone and felt something shift. Not break, shift. Remedios wasn't just coming after me. She was going after the one person in the family with enough authority to stand against her, whispering to everyone that Amparo was old and confused. The locksmith showed up before midnight and changed both locks in 40 minutes. I held the new keys in my hand, 2 small pieces of metal. They meant my mother couldn't give anyone access to my home anymore. Over the next 3 days, the calls started coming in. Tadeo called first. He said Remedios told him I kicked Osvaldo out at midnight and changed the locks while he stood on the sidewalk crying. I told him what actually happened. He listened and said, "I figured," but she was very convincing. He added as a warning that my mother was making a strong case to everyone who would listen. The next day, Fermina called. Her voice was stiff. She said changing locks and shutting out a man who wanted to fix things seemed extreme. I started to explain. She cut me off and said, "Your mother said you'd try to make her the villain. She said you've been doing that since you were a teenager." I stopped talking, because right there I understood what Remedios had done. She didn't just tell Fermina a different version of events. She told Fermina what I would say when I tried to defend myself. She predicted my defense and used it against me before I even opened my mouth. The trap was set. The more I explained, the more I proved Remedios right in Fermina's eyes. I said goodbye and hung up. Fear, real fear, because my mother was winning. She was taking the people I grew up with and turning them one at a time. Amparo was right. Lisbeth was kind but quiet. Tadeo was fair but careful. Fermina was already gone. And Remedios was loud. I called Amparo and told her everything. Tadeo's call, Fermina's call, the nightly phone campaigns. Amparo listened without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't sound surprised. She sounded like a woman who had been expecting exactly this. We made a plan. Sunday dinner at Amparo's house, every family member invited, and this time I would control the room. I spent 2 days writing down a timeline. Pablito at the door with the credit card statement, the 11 months, the fake birthday dinner, the spare key. I wanted the family to hear the truth from my mouth. Sunday morning, I woke up before the alarm. I was ready. I arrived at Amparo's house just before noon. She opened the door before I could knock. The table was set for 7 with the good plates, the ones with the blue edges that only came out for serious occasions. Lisbeth squeezed my arm without saying anything. Tadeo sat at the far end of the table. Fermina walked in looking stiff, purse held tight, and didn't meet my eyes. Then Remedios arrived in a navy dress carrying white roses. She kissed everyone on the cheek, including me, her lips cold and dry against my skin. She set the flowers on the counter and said, "Family is what matters." Amparo sat at the head of the table and folded her hands. She looked at each person one by one and said, "Before we eat, my granddaughter has something to say. Everyone is going to sit and listen until she's finished." I pushed my chair back and stood up. My hands were shaking a little, but my voice wasn't, and that was what mattered. I started from the beginning. I told them about Pablito. I said, "A man I had never met knocked on my front door. He was the husband of the woman Osvaldo had been sleeping with. He brought credit card statements, 2 charges a week, every Tuesday, every Thursday, for 11 months. I paused and let that number sit in the room. 11 months. Not a moment of weakness. Nearly a year of planning and lying and driving to the same place twice a week like it was a second job. I told them Osvaldo denied it for 4 minutes before he realized I had too many details. I told them he said it started as a friendship and became something more. I told them I said no, and he packed a bag and left. I watched the faces around the table while I spoke. Tadeo was staring at the tablecloth, his jaw set, his hands flat like he was holding himself in place. Fermina's jaw was tight and she was sitting very still. Lisbeth was nodding, and Remedios was looking at the wall to her left with her arms crossed, like if she didn't look at me the words wouldn't count. I moved to what Remedios did. I told them she called me the next morning not to ask what happened but to tell me what to do. I described the dinner. I looked right at Fermina when I said it. I said, 3 days later my mother told me we were having dinner for your birthday, Fermina. She used your birthday as cover to ambush ambush me with my husband in front of everyone in this room. I paused and asked the question I had been holding all week. I said, "Did you know your birthday was used as cover?" Fermina's face changed, from stiff and guarded to something sharper. She turned her head slowly toward Remedios. She said quietly, like she was handling something fragile, "You told me she wanted to come. You told me she agreed to see him." Remedios said nothing. She kept staring at the wall, but I could see a muscle in her jaw working. I kept going. I told them about Remedios grabbing my wrist and pulling it toward the floor. I said, "She told me to get on my knees and beg the man who cheated on me for 11 months to please not leave me, like I was the one who did something wrong." Then I took my phone out and scrolled to the text I had saved and held it up so everyone could see the screen. I read it out loud. I said, "This is a text from Osvaldo the night of the dinner. It says, 'Your mom gave me the spare key. I'm inside. We need to talk. Please don't be angry.'" I put the phone face up on the table and said, "She took the key from my kitchen drawer without telling me." She gave it to Osvaldo and told him what time I would be gone and what to say when I got home. She set up the dinner as the first attempt, and when Amparo shut it down, she had a backup plan already running at my house. I looked at Tadeo. I said, "She told you I threw Osvaldo out at midnight while he cried on the sidewalk. Did she tell you he let himself into my house with a key she gave him without my knowledge?" Tadeo shook his head slowly. He looked like a man who had just realized the floor wasn't as solid as he thought. Fermina put her hand over her mouth. I looked at my mother. I said, "And when none of it worked, you called every person in this family, every single night, and told them a version of events where I was cold and cruel. You told Fermina I had been making you the villain since I was a teenager. You told Tadeo I threw a crying man onto the sidewalk. You told people Amparo was confused and didn't know what she saw at dinner. And then you told Osvaldo I already had a lawyer and was trying to take the house, which was a lie, so that even the divorce would turn into a war." Remedios finally moved. She uncrossed her arms and put her hands flat on the table. She looked at me and her voice was steady. She said, "Everything I did was because I love you. You don't see it now, but one day you'll understand." The words came out smooth and practiced, like she had said them to herself 100 times. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Amparo spoke. Her voice was low and clear, and it cut through the room like something sharp moving through still water. She said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly in front of your family." Remedios stiffened. Her back went straight. She looked at Amparo, and something passed across her face that looked a lot like fear. Amparo held her gaze and said, "Did your husband do the same thing to you?" The room went completely still. Not quiet. Still. Like every person at that table stopped breathing at the same time. Fermina's hand dropped from her mouth. Tadeo's head came up. Lisbeth's fingers pressed into my back. Remedios' face did something I had never seen before. It crumbled, not all at once, in pieces. Her mouth pressed together so tight her lips went white. Her chin trembled. Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall right away. They sat there balanced while she fought to hold herself together. She didn't speak for a long time, long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. Then she said very quietly, "That has nothing to do with this." Amparo didn't look away. She said, "It has everything to do with this. You stayed. You swallowed it. You told yourself it was strength. And now you cannot bear to watch your daughter choose differently because if she walks away, it means you didn't have to stay. And that is a truth you are not ready to face." The tears fell. Not the loud, angry kind my mother usually used when she wanted to win an argument. These were quiet. They ran down her cheeks in 2 straight lines and she didn't wipe them away. Her shoulders dropped. Her hands on the table curled into loose fists and then went limp. And I looked at my mother's face and for the first time in my life I saw her. Not the woman who grabbed my wrist. Not the woman who gave away my key. I saw a woman who had been hurt the same way I was hurt, maybe worse, and who stayed because she believed staying was the only thing a woman could do. A woman who built her identity around enduring, swallowing the pain and calling it strength, holding a family together even when the man she married gave her every reason to let go. And now her daughter was doing the thing she never let herself do, walking away, choosing dignity over endurance. If I was right to leave, she was wrong to stay. And if she was wrong to stay, then all those years of suffering and telling herself it was worth it were for nothing. She wasn't trying to save my marriage. She was trying to save her own story. I pushed my chair back and walked around the table to where she was sitting. I stood next to her and she looked up at me and her face was wet and open in a way I had never seen before. I said, "I love you, but I'm not going to kneel. Not for him, not for anyone." My voice cracked a little on the next part, but I said it anyway. "And you didn't have to either." Remedios made a small sound, not a word, just a sound, like something breaking loose from somewhere deep inside her. She reached out and grabbed my hand and pressed it against her own face, against her wet cheek, and held it there. She closed her eyes and the tears kept coming, quiet and steady, and I could feel them warm against my fingers. Amparo reached across the table and put her hand on top of both of ours. Her hand was small and thin and cool, and it rested there gently. Fermina was crying. Tadeo was staring at his plate with his jaw tight and his eyes red. Lisbeth had her hand pressed firm between my shoulder blades, steady as a wall. I stood there in my grandmother's kitchen holding my mother's hand against her face. I didn't kneel. I didn't beg. I didn't apologize for choosing myself. And the thing that surprised me most, the thing I never expected, was that when I finally stood all the way up, my mother didn't push me back down. She held my hand and cried, and for once in her life, she let me be the strong one.